All right, everybody, welcome back to Matt Money. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the topics that I'm definitely going to be diving deeper into over the coming years, and that is lithium. Today, we're fortunate to have Steve Hanson, CEO of Acme Lithium, to discuss the current environment with us. Feel free to check out their website, acmelithium.com, or their ticker symbol on the OTC markets at ACLHF, or on the Canadian Stock Exchange, which this one's pretty easy, at Acme, ACME. So Steve has almost 30 years of experience across a multitude of roles: CEO, board, and advisor positions, multiple public and private companies in mining, alternative energies, oil sector, multiple successful M&A transactions, including exits with major corporations. So needless to say, Steve is extremely qualified to talk to us and educate us a little bit about lithium today. Steve, thank you so much for being here. Please feel free to add anything to your resume that I may have missed. And really looking forward to hearing your take on lithium today.
Well, Matt, a pleasure to be with you today and looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So I wanted to dive a little bit into the environment, obviously. So great bullish market that we're having for lithium right now. Prices have soared hundreds of percent over the past year or two, peaking out over $50,000 per metric ton. Some people say it even went up to 70,000 per metric ton. What is your interpretation of the recent price? Is it sustainable? How do you see prices faring going forward?
Well, as you mentioned, it's been quite the last year for lithium as a commodity, and it really is driven by a number of macro themes. Many of your listeners may not quite know that lithium is only produced in a handful of countries around the world, countries like China, Australia, Argentina, and Chile. And so as a result, many nations around the world are scrambling to find this commodity in large supply due to what's been driven by EV demand and battery storage, and the fact that we use lithium every day in our cell phones and our laptops and our tablets. So when only a handful of countries are producing lithium, it creates really what is a crisis where countries and their battery factories, as they continue to expand this massive area of growth, are desperate for the commodity. So as you mentioned, we've seen this over 400% increase in the price of the commodity this year. And it's, again, driven by a number of themes. Obviously, everyone's well aware of what's happening in the EV space. Many of the auto manufacturers are forecasting and continuing to get huge demand for these vehicles as these divisions roll off the assembly line. GM is expecting and targeting to have 50% of their vehicles EV by a certain date. Ford is putting $20 billion into their EV and hybrid division. States like California are mandating that every 50% of all vehicles need to be hybrid or EV by a certain date. So there's these macro themes that are going around the world that is driving this desperate need for battery metals, and in particular in lithium. So from a domestic standpoint, in the United States and Canada, it's become really what is an economic and security crisis. And that's why we're seeing things like such as the Defense Production Act being invoked by Biden for critical minerals, and Prime Minister Trudeau announcing that they're investing billions of dollars into the sector to ensure that there is a domestic supply in the United States and in Canada.
Yeah, that's you touched on a couple things that I definitely wanted to dive deeper on. I just read a report that Ford, by the end of 2023, is going to have 600,000 annual run rate for their EVs, going into 2 million, I believe, by 2026. And GM is probably not too different from that. So you're seeing a massive increase. And I think I've seen the demand for just the lithium usage alone in the EV space going to increase tenfold between now and 2030. So it's prudent to, like you said, from a national security standpoint, look at producing it in-house and not necessarily have to rely, not in-house, but in country, not to necessarily have to rely on some of these external countries. But why do you think it's taken so long for North America to truly start to develop their own lithium industry? It's here, as you will talk about with your company a little bit later. Is it just been easier to import it, or?
Well, a number of reasons. First of all, many explorers in the mining space have just not tested for lithium or other metals such as rare earths. I mean, there's been extensive drilling and exploration from Alaska all the way down to the southern parts of the US, but mainly testing for gold and silver and copper and iron and other metals. Most people, 15, 20, 25 years ago, were not sending samples off to the lab and testing for commodities like lithium or rare earths. And I think really what's been driving this now is the expectation in the green economy due to climate change that we need to get off of fossil fuels. And I'm not saying that we're going to get off fossil fuels totally. We're going to continue to need fossil fuels, obviously, in shipping and trucking, and it's going to be many, many, many years. But there are directives at the state level, the municipal level, and federal level to continue to advance the green economy in the interest of ensuring that we don't continue to have climate change issues. And so really the crisis in this call has happened in the last few years where, and that's really what's been driving, the EV and hybrid space. And we've obviously seen a huge jump in gasoline prices. So, people are also motivated to get into a hybrid or an EV vehicle due to the expensive cost at the pump. And there is a motivation by many people to contribute to the green economy by driving an EV or a VV or a hybrid vehicle. I think the other area that is about technology advancement. It's taken a long time to get battery size and power and cost down to a level that we can actually use them effectively in vehicles or in battery grid storage, which is actually the biggest area of potential growth around the world. We're seeing brownouts in certain areas, as usage at night is lower and day use is high. So, whether you're trying to manage electricity and power around the world or alternative energy such as wind or solar, battery grid storage is going to be very important. So it's only in the last really 4 or 5 years where we've seen battery technology come along where it's cost effective to use it. So combining those elements really has resulted in what is now considered to be a crisis, in that we absolutely need to find and develop these mineral resources that are actually located in North America in a number of places. So it's an interesting time to be a lithium explorer. We have a world-class portfolio of projects at Acme Lithium, and we're excited about the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Two key things that I wanted to highlight is I did see almost not a one-for-one correlation with the oil price on lithium, but it seemed like in 2021, as oil prices started to take off, lithium was almost in tandem with it. And then I do like what you kind of mentioned. It's almost like the semiconductor space with Ohm's law, right? The ability to be able to create batteries that are smaller and more effective over time. You've seen that with the ranges that have come from, 100 miles on a battery used to be large. Now companies are starting to put out almost 1,000-kilometer battery extensions, and it's ranges, and it's pretty interesting to really see. So I want to transition. You kind of alluded to it already, and I would love to touch more on that. Talking about Acme Lithium, you guys are positioning yourselves in 4 different projects: Nevada, Manitoba, which, as you have mentioned as well, great mining districts for gold, silver, and many other precious metals as well. What's your elevator pitch on these projects? Are they very close to being contributing to the supply? Do you need to continue to delineate?
Well, as founder of the company, and I founded the company just under 2 years ago, when actually the lithium market was a little bit soft. There was a quiet period there, and I felt there was an opportunity to potentially go after projects. And I started to focus in on what I really believe was going to be a crisis domestically in the United States and Canada for supply. And sure enough, that's certainly been the case over the last couple of years. The first project I acquired was in an area called Fish Lake Valley, which is halfway between Reno and Las Vegas. And then the second project, which is our flagship project in Nevada, is in Clayton Valley, which is really the epicenter of lithium development in the US, and in fact is the only place where lithium has been produced in the United States consistently since 1966 at Silver Peak. And that project is run by a $25 billion US New York Stock Exchange company called Albemarle. And we are their northwest neighbor. We're contiguous to their project. And so we were fortunate to acquire that project early on in the founding of our business. So we have two core projects in Nevada for lithium exploration. We're an explorer. We know that geologically, there's lithium within this region. There's a number of other companies that are working in this area to advance their project. We're excited about the prospects of what we potentially may have. We've recently drilled what is called a lithium brine well north of Silver Peak. This past June, we completed that drilling the first week of July, and now we're waiting on results. And what's interesting about lithium, again, it's the lightest metal. It's white or slightly off-white. And it's found in a number of forms. It's found in hard rock, it's found in clay, and it's also found in brine. And so it's very unique as a metal in that there's a number of ways that lithium can be found and ultimately produced. Most of the lithium in South America is produced from brine, which is salt water. It comes from aquifers and water flowing through clays and gravels and sands. And then, Australia, for example, most of the lithium is found in hard rock. So our core project in Nevada is a lithium brine project. So in fact, unlike hard rock mining, we ultimately will be producing from a well. So it's more akin to actually the oil and gas industry in that there's multiple horizons or intervals that you drill into that potentially can produce fluids. And then from those fluids, we extract lithium. So what's great about a brine project is that you're not having to drill hundreds of holes like hard rock mining, like a pincushion. You can drill a handful of holes and ultimately understand permeability and pressure. And then obviously grade is very important. And so we're right now waiting on results from that drill program that took place a few weeks ago. We should have results by the end of the summer from the lab, and really excited to see if we can make a major discovery here, which will be significant. It's only a handful of brine wells being drilled in North America, over the last couple of years. We're a unique project, and again, hoping to make a major discovery and ultimately develop this project to meet the domestic need here in the US and in Canada for lithium.
Yeah, I remember when you were kind of talking to me about this last week. Yeah, I was pretty astonished, because every time I think about lithium, uranium, I think of open pit mining and all that sort of stuff. But it really hits home for me because I work in oil and gas, and so to hear how similar it is, right, was really cool to me. And you alluded to me as well that there's a different process that you guys might undertake when you do this. So a lot of people just put the lithium and brine into kind of these lakes that then they wait for evaporation. But you and I were kind of discussing a little bit about the new process that might make it a little bit more efficient and easier to be able to extract the lithium, if you want to touch on that.
Well, as I mentioned before, much of the industry now is being driven by technology advancements. And when you absolutely need something and people are willing to pay for it, technology R&D comes into play here. And there's been some great research and development being done by a number of companies in what's called DLE, direct lithium extraction. And rather than, as you mentioned, putting lithium brine into large brine ponds or pools, multi-football size field areas where ultimately the brine is evaporated, there are now systems under development. Let's call them plants, where brine is being sent into the plant. It's being processed by a number of new technologies, lithium extracted, and ultimately that water can be injected back into the ground and into the aquifer. So again, there's a number of companies around the world, from Houston to San Diego to Latin America to Alberta, that are working on DLE technology. And I think this is the future. I don't see any projects in the US or Canada being developed without DLE, certainly from a brine standpoint. I mean, that's where it's being used. There's a different process, obviously, for clay and for hard rock. but I expect that any brine project that ultimately will go into production domestically will have a DLE technology as part of it.
Yeah, and from what it sounds like, I mean, instead of having to wait for it to evaporate and then be able to collect it, off the surface of the pools, like you say, to me, being able to put it into, and extract it from some sort of facility or separator seems like, in my opinion, a less carbon intensive way, right, to be able to get these things out. So I think it's going to help with the green footprint as well.
Absolutely. There's a number of advantages. Your capital costs are lower, your operating costs are lower, and most importantly, your environmental footprint is much lower in the impact of the region. Your space needs are much smaller, and ultimately, environmentally, it's going to be a better process. And that's really important today, is that we have to use best practices when we're in this business. There's permitting that we have to go through. And again, we want to be leaders in our sector in ensuring that we have, good governance. And again, as I mentioned, best practices, and look at all stakeholders in the area, whether it be, municipal, state, and federal. So, I think these new technologies are going to change our entire industry. They're going to make them more effective and hopefully more profitable as well. But again, we want to be good stewards for our projects and do things in the most sensitive and environmental way.
Yeah, that's good. So very interesting results kind of coming out of Nevada. I'm curious to see what the results end up coming back at. Tell us a little bit about Manitoba. It's a little bit different of a project, but still in a very what's the word I'm looking for? Prolific mining area in southeastern Manitoba.
Well, as you mentioned, we pivot from our two projects in Nevada. I started investigating a number of regions throughout the Western United States as well as throughout Canada, and I've looked at projects actually all around the world. And I started to focus in on a region in southeastern Manitoba, an area in around what's called the Tanko mine. And the Tanko mine is a lithium, cesium, tantalum mine that's been producing off and on since 1969. And it's the only place in Canada where lithium has actually been produced. It was bought by a large Chinese company a number of years ago and is actually in production today. And so here we are at Acme Lithium. We've put a portfolio of projects together. We neighbor one of the only places that produces lithium in the United States, and now we neighbor one of the only places that produces lithium in Canada. And I'm not saying that closology is going to ensure our success, but I'll tell you, the best place to find and discover a commodity is next to something where it already exists. So geologically, we're in the right region. Again, as I mentioned, the Tanko mine is mining hard rock, and lithium is hosted in a rock called pegmatite. There's massive pegmatite fields throughout this region. There's been a long history of mining in the area. In fact, there's a number of old tin mines that are in the region. And, interesting enough, if you find tin, you tend to find lithium. So we did some analysis of the region. We looked through historical documents, did some geological mapping, and ultimately put together two projects in this southeastern Manitoba region. We have a large project that is directly south, about 1.5 miles south of the Tanko mine. So we are their southern neighbor and are actively exploring in that area. I have a dozen crew members that started working there the first week of July, and we have a major summer program taking place in southeastern Manitoba as we speak. We're also doing some airborne geophysics there as well in parallel, which will take a picture of the Earth and what's going on, and ultimately will give us more information in defining where we will drill, which we hope to do coming up this fall. And then I have a second project in southeastern Manitoba, about 15 miles north of the Tanko mine, and we're actively exploring that project in parallel to our project to the south. So we're very busy. We've got boots on the ground in Nevada, and we're very active in Manitoba, and ultimately we hope to make a major discovery and ultimately develop it and de-risk these projects, and hopefully one day we can deliver on the North American lithium supply down the road.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue. Your team has done a phenomenal job acquiring these projects in Nevada and Manitoba. How do you see Acme leveraging that in the future? Do you want to continue to be an explorer? Do you want to actually develop these projects like you just kind of mentioned? Continue to acquire these positions in North America? take them to PEA and then sell them off to a larger company, or do you want to develop them yourself?
Well, we're really sort of proud of the portfolio we put together, and we think we're well positioned. And obviously, there's risk and capital involved in being an explorer. And many of the larger companies that are out there, whether they be commodity traders or large mining companies or technology companies or even auto manufacturers, many companies around the world, they're looking for lithium supply. Tend not to get involved until you've made a discovery and advance your project into the development stage. What's really interesting about what's happening in the lithium sector is we're seeing some of these larger companies acquire or invest in projects at a much earlier stage. There's been a lot of M&A activity in our sector. There was a $1 billion acquisition last week by a large Chinese company of a project in Argentina. I think we'll continue to see merger and acquisition announcements as players around the world continue to look for good projects. My history over my 30-year career is exploring and developing projects to a certain stage where we've de-risked them somewhat and advanced them to a stage where larger companies can take a closer look and assess them. So, I mean, my goal here is to continue to advance our projects, hopefully make a major discovery, and ultimately come out with a resource calculation down the road. Again, there's no guarantee that's going to happen, but we're certainly hopeful that will be a milestone, in the next couple of years. And then start talking to potential partners. There's large companies that have deep pockets, very smart people, and ultimately need offtake, where they need the commodity supply to either their customers or even themselves as end users. So again, I've done that with a number of projects over my career where I've brought in a larger partner at a certain stage who can assist us in ultimately developing the project. So, I think that really is as either an exit strategy or as a growth strategy. I think that really is the best way for us to go. Again, there's much larger companies that are incredibly competent at what they do, and ultimately are looking for companies like Acme Lithium down the road if we have success.
No, that's exactly what I was kind of thinking, that the strategy was kind of going to be. It was either that one of those two paths, right? You're either going to grow with a partner, or you're going to basically let them take it over and continue along the exploration path. But when I was talking to you last week, I was amazed at your keen ability to be able to pick up these things when it seems like, everybody, in retrospect, everybody should have been trying to pick up a lot of these projects, especially Claim Lake and where you're kind of talking about in southeast, 1 mile south of the Tesco mine. So interesting. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Acme. I guess, is there any upcoming milestones that you should want any retail investors to, like myself or anybody else, to be on the lookout for over the coming months? Or is this going to be something where you're going to get more boots on the ground and say early 2023 and drill out and then?
Well, before I answer that question, I just want to say I have to really tip my hat off to members of my team. You mentioned that we've been fortunate to acquire this portfolio of projects, which hopefully provides multiple opportunities for our investors in ultimately making a discovery. We're fortunate, but it really is, my hat's off to many of my team members who are very smart and competent people geologically. And really it's their work and research that ultimately led us to these projects in going forward. So, I'm surrounded by some very competent people, which, we're fortunate at Acme to have as either employees or as consultants that work for us. There are some major catalysts coming up at Acme, and this is why 2022 is going to be a really exciting year for us. As I mentioned, we drilled our very first lithium brine well, which completed the first week of July. Hundreds of gallons of brine are at the lab right now, as well as core that we drilled. Samples from core were taken as well. They're at the lab. We're going to have those results here probably in the next 30 days. So again, near-term milestones coming up. I'm in the same way as everybody else. I'm in the dark as to what those results will be, but we drilled into the same lithology that historically has had lithium. We drilled into the same intervals. We tested for brine coming into the system at around 850 feet, and it intensified all the way down to the bottom of the hole. So again, we're in the right horizon, the right host, so to speak, but we don't know grade, and we won't know that for probably another 30 days or so. So that's upcoming, and we're very excited about that. We'll complete our program here in Manitoba, our summer program, and then really excited to start drilling there as well sometime in mid-fall. So again, a number of milestones taking place and potential catalysts here in southeastern Manitoba. And then at Fish Lake Valley, which is the valley over from Clayton Valley in Nevada, we are starting some work this fall, and I'll make a drilling decision sometime probably in the fourth quarter of 2022. And we could be drilling Fish Lake Valley here as another project sometime in early 2023. So lots going on at Acme Lithium. It's very, very busy as a company right now, and we look forward to hopefully investors coming along with us and as we develop this business.
Yeah, I'm glad you thanked the team, because I when I talked to you last week, I thought you were the mastermind behind it all, and you were the one that found everything. But yeah, it's the geologists and the folks that are on the ground that truly make these companies truly run. Steve, I want to thank you so much. I learned a lot, even more from when I talked to you last week. Sorry. Really looking forward to the upcoming results, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. And I hope to have you on the channel again soon.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, Matt. Appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.